Hi, and welcome to My Words, Our Journey, the podcast. My name is Monty, and I'm your host. Last week, we started a new short expedition that we called the Souls of Willow. And just as a reminder, Willow's found herself the only person alive in the convent, and now she's been asked to take revenge. So, let's start today's episode with Chapter 4. Over the next few months, locals spoke of the sightings of a young girl in the woods atop the convent, even among the town's closely spaced homes in the middle of the night once or twice. There were also reports of wild cries of pain and agony coming from the direction of the convent, sometimes accompanied by loud barking and howling. The horror that must have occurred was enough for most to believe the place had to have been haunted. So, 3 months to the day, demolition of the property began. Stone separated from wood, but neither would be kept because it was believed they could be haunted as well. The wood would be burned in the rock, and everything else that wouldn't burn would be crushed, thrown into a pit, and buried as far out of town as possible. It was a spectacle watched from afar for most. The only ones that had volunteered for the jobs were those that had no other options or avenues to make a way for themselves, the lowest class of the village, while others had taken up residence on the surrounding mounds to eat, drink, laugh, and joke, and watch the daily activities. For the past 3 months, Willow, Thunder, and Storm had been getting stronger, realizing their potential through trial and error, and for Willow, at least fighting the urge that grew inside her daily to avenge those that had died so violently deaths, and looking to her for help. Willow would hear the whispers in her head, eye for an eye. She had tried to counter those whispers with, turn the other cheek, but in the end, she had agreed that those words did not seem to fit in this instance. God's wrath, Willow's oncoming storm, the souls that had temporarily taken refuge within her did not care. They craved justice, and justice to them meant blood, agony, complete horror of the magnitude that they had experienced. Willow was not built that way, and had refused, to the point that she was getting sick every day now. Thunder and Storm could sense her illness and internal struggle. They had tried to adjust too, but they seemed to be handling it much better than she. It was not until they started taking down her home that the pendulum began to swing in the other direction. She would watch them destroy what had taken generations to build, throwing precious items into a fire, and then laughing. They could be heard near and far. It was as if the lives lost didn't matter to any of them. The books, clothing, children's toys, and finally the religious symbols from their common areas, rooms, and the great chamber hall were reduced to their simplest forms. William was a 19-year-old working on the convent at the request of his parents, who both weren't able to work because of health issues. The money was needed for food and supplies, or they would starve according to them. William was reluctant, but not because he believed all the stories. No, he just didn't like to work, didn't like manual labor. So as soon as he got the chance, he would go off exploring, looking for anything of value that he might be able to slip into his pockets. Somehow, he had wandered into the basement, far from the others, excited to explore what gems he might find along the way, where he assumed no one had been in years. He would be wrong. Chapter 5. Previously, Willow, Storm, and Thunder had had a strong bond, built on their time together and mutual love. Now, it was different. Now the three were the only thing that really mattered. No words had to be spoken for one to know what the other was feeling, thinking. It was hard at first, because the senses could be confusing. But now, they had learned to separate their thoughts, feelings, instructions, and even attack plans. Darkness was broken by the flame young Williams carried in his left hand, keeping free his right to touch and feel his way down the long corridor. Only glancing in rooms as he passed, he did not want to be gone long before the others noticed and began searching. Shadows long across the wall, the stillness. It was as if he was the only one on earth. As he rolled what he could only imagine was some kind of jewelry in his hand. Seemingly through the walls, the whispers began. Take our belongings like you took our lives. And what sounded like hundreds of different female voices. Take our belongings like you took our lives. William turned in complete circle, seeing no one. As he exited the room and made the left to hastily go back to where he had come, the whisper was now the singular voice of a strong woman, and it was coming from directly behind him. "Take our belongings, like you took our lives." Turning with flame extended, the once brave soul now was less sure of himself. In the distance, he could see the silhouette. Maybe a woman, maybe a girl. The darkness hid her secrets. The stillness seemed to be now alive somehow, engulfing him, all his thoughts lost for the briefest of moments. When he realized he was meant to run, he turned. It was met with the bright white teeth of the two eager Doberman pinschers. Now the figure was right behind him, whispering again, this time right into his ear. "You will wish you were dead 100 times before you were shown mercy and taken from this world." Sometimes we hear, but truly do not completely understand the words spoken. Willow meant every word, and more importantly, Thunder and Storm took those words as a directive to make sure she was not lying when she said them. Biting his left hand, Thunder freed the flame from everywhere and nowhere at the same time. Gusts of wind took the flame, and with it, darkness. Storm went straight to his mouth, taking away William's tongue, where he ripped it from his bloody mouth. The whole thing didn't take long, but it could have been quicker if not for Willow's words. Now she watched with clarity, as if there was no darkness at all, only light, as her and her two companions understood the assignment. And like two skilled surgeons, they had taken their victim apart in a methodical way, leaving him alive and conscious while other body parts lay sprawled at his side. He had prayed, begged, not for anyone to come to help. He knew it was too late for that. He only wanted death. And when he was finally shown the mercy Willow spoke of, the two beasts ripped at his neck until his head was separated from his torso. In the darkness, the three figures disappeared, dogs licking their faces, neither out of breath. They were perfect fit specimens. Willow was in her head. The voices had become quiet. It was the first time in a while. They felt the smallest of what they wanted from Willow. She in turn felt, for the first time, what they truly wanted from her. Chapter 6. The fires were now only embers, small trails of smoke weaving their way to the heavens. The whole would be filled in the following day, covering the tainted relics of the nuns that had met such a disturbing end. The townfolk heard rumors and gossip, but they had no idea what really happened within the walls of the convent. One thing was for sure: the Sunday following the discovery, the three churches within the town each had an increase in attendance. Whatever had happened to them, no sane person would want the same fate to fall upon them or their house. While most of the townsfolk slept, there was a few of the unlucky ones that were still digging at the site where everything would be burned or buried. The original hole was determined to be too small to hold everything that did not or would not burn. It had also been determined that the lazy youth William had taken the opportunity to slip away when no one was looking because he found the work was too hard. Even his parents had a hard time not believing it was true, so there was no search. Rats took care of the rest. At the digging site, three men were taking a break, discussing William and his sudden departure. Two of the men found it odd. He had left some of his belongings, as well as his day pay, the previous day. But they did not know him, and none of the three really cared what happened to him. Just a way to pass the time. The night was going to be long. There would be 8 of them total, and they were expected to nearly double the size of the hole that had already been dug. The moon was behind the clouds. The air was still. The work was hard. When the 2 stray dogs wandered onto the work site, it was a welcome distraction. They looked identical, beautiful with their ears at attention, their black coats shiny in the dim light of the torches, their cropped tails wagging as the men took turns telling them what good dogs they were and how good they looked, rubbing their heads and underneath their chins. Thunder and Storm were magnificent animals, broad shoulders and leg muscles that flexed with the slightest movement. They had done their job. When they were done, they turned and wandered back into the darkness. A gentle breeze carried her words to the ears as they watched the pair disappear into the night. Buried alive you will be, an ending worthy of your lives. When they turned in unison, they could see the young woman holding all their torches. She wore a dress. It appeared to be covered in blood. Face was pale. Her hair was long, dark, unkempt. When they heard the words again, it did not appear her lips moved. When the dogs appeared from nowhere with loud barks and snarling teeth, the men had nowhere to go except into the hole. Stirring after what felt like a short nap, all 8 men were face down in the dirt, their tongues and eyelids removed, no clothing, and while they did not appear to be tied or bound, none of them could move a muscle. From directly above them, "You will wish you were dead 100 times before you are shown mercy and taken from this world." Floating in the air, the words were only words until the air shifted, a cool breeze became a fierce wind that lasted only a few moments. The men were now covered with poison oak, gently tickling the neck, back, and legs. The voice from a whisper to what sounded like 100 voices let them know what to expect throughout the night. Poison oak would be followed by sand fleas, then angry bullet ants, and finally the war wasp, by which time they would beg for death, only be granted their wish by being buried alive by their own family and loved ones. Willow was halfway back to the forest when she felt the shiver, the shift. The men were beginning to understand the words that she had spoken to them. The pain that they would endure for the short time they had left would feel like an eternity. The following morning, the townsfolk were surprised to find the hole had been completed, but the workers nowhere to be found. The buzz again, between 8 workers now missing and the one from the other day at the convent. Those that liked to talk about things like this, they all agreed there was no time to wait. The very ground that they stood on could be cursed. They needed to dispense of every last memory of the events that took place. So with haste, men began to toss everything into the pit. The 8 men at the bottom, who had just endured what most would consider a living nightmare, were now being pelted with heavy, pointed objects, things that crushed bone, penetrated skin, overall causing it increasingly hard to breathe. Their silent begging had not gotten them the death they desired. No, it would not come until the sand and dirt began to be tossed. Then they could feel the level of inching higher and higher, heart rates now at a maximum. While they had prayed for death, now that it was so close, no one really wanted to see the other side, especially if you thought there was nothing there. Chapter 7. Willow was changing physically. She was stronger, had more endurance. Mentally, she felt smarter, surer of herself. The killings had appeased the souls within her. Now they were all on the same sheet of music, rowing in the same direction, or whatever other analogy you chose. Willow had stopped pulling against them and had leaned into the will of the group. Thunder and Storm had wandered off a bit, but they were never far away. She took the opportunity to just sit. So much was going on. The darkness that surrounded her, the lack of movement in the air, it was perfect, exactly what she needed. Clarity would come through the stillness, she thought. After a few short moments, she began to walk towards where she thought the dogs would be. From this point, she could see the town below. The Dobermans had been staring in that direction, as if waiting for something. A sign, maybe. When the sound of a small dog reached the tree line, Willow was just about to turn around. But she stopped in her tracks. She did a 180 to see the dog, still staring in that direction. Now standing, ready to defend or attack, she wondered. Blowing through the front door of the small, modest cottage on the outskirts of town, Willow watched a small child chase after the dog. It was late, too late for a child to be up, let alone outside. The trio watched as the pet was leading the child straight towards the wooded area below them. Woods that came to life after dark. Predators of all shapes and sizes, looking for their next prey. The child and the dog would fit the bill for many of those creatures. The 3 took their first step at exactly the same time, and without making a sound, moved with purpose towards the action. From their vantage point, they could no longer see what was happening, but they could hear the sound of the wolves. By the time they were within just a few feet, the 6 wolves had encircled the child, who now held the dog tight in her arms. The dog, sensing the danger, had curled up right up under her arm, and was making no sound. Willow saw herself in the child as she watched her pick up a stick, fully prepared to do battle with the predators preparing to pounce. In Latin, Willow said to thunder and storm, "Salva Purium." It was all over in a matter of only a few minutes. Thunder and Storm worked as one as they destroyed the once eager competition. Willow had watched as her companions entered the opening with one long stride, one on each side of the child, showing they meant to protect. The 6 wolves were not impressed and attacked with skill and speed, but were quickly outmatched. Not a hair on the child's head was touched, not a scratch on her body. Before anyone could catch their breath from the ordeal, men's voices could be heard as they yelled for the child and at each other. Then the flames could be seen. When they came into the opening, they at once began to attack Thunder and Storm, tossing fire, picking up rocks, and trying to stab at them with their long knives and pitchforks. The child began to cry. The dogs ran to Willow, who was so disgusted by the men, she moved out from the shadows into the light of the flames, again in Latin, "Cure!" Then, "Cure!" The mighty branches on the trees began to sway. The torches were extinguished by the now whipping wind, and again the voice of 100, "Cure!" Trees large and small began to become uprooted. Some caught up in the wind, while others toppled to the ground. The sound could not be heard over the fierce winds. Screams from the child, as the adults, were muted as well. Willow watched as a large tree began to fall from the sky. It would hit where the child and many of the men stood. Without thought, she stepped forward and screamed, "Tutela!" The scream could be heard above all else. The wind took the tree away, far out of sight, and then it fell quickly to the ground. Willow, Thunder, and Storm were already just a distant shadow as the men regained their bearings. The men only stood in place, trying to wrap their minds around what they had just witnessed. The child, young, but old enough to believe that she had just been saved by an angel. Willow was trying to wrap her mind around the events as well. What language had she just spoken? But more importantly, why did the passengers want the child dead? And I think that'll be a good place for us to stop today. Willow, Thunder, and Storm have been very busy. I hope you've enjoyed the journey, the expedition so far, and I hope you'll join me next time as we see what happens with the small town, with Willow, with Thunder, and with Storm. Thank you for listening. Have a great day.